Hello there. In this video, we are going to see how to extend the tenant management module in the ABP and add a custom host to the ABP app so that you can log in with the custom domain instead of using a subdomain or using the query string as a tenant resolver. I have a custom folder here, and I also wrote a blog post about this topic. We are going to follow the blog post. So the first thing you have to do is add a host entry in the host file for the domain resolve. So we are going to use test1.local and then point that to the local host IP, that is 127.0.0.1. The location for the host file in the Windows is in C Windows System 32 drivers etc and host. In Linux, it's a different location. Just Google it and find out. So that when we type test1.local, it goes to the local host, and then we can use the port to resolve the tenant. In the real world, you'll probably add a DNS entry and then point the IP of your gateway or your application. So once that is done, I have already done that, so I'm not going to do that again. So I have already added my test1.local and then test2.local. Okay, so the next step is to create the ABP app. We will do that. For that, I have already created a folder, and then we will say ABP new custom host. This will create a new ABP application for us. Perfect. And then we can do start. That will open the folder, and then we can open that in Visual Studio. So once that is opened, it's in the screen. I will bring it here. Okay, so we have our application open. So as always, we have to first run the migration, set the project as DB migrator, and wait for the restoration to finish. Once the app is ready to be run, okay, everything is restored. Click the custom DB migrator. It will build the project and run it. The first build will take some time. Okay, our host has launched. This will create the migrations and also seed your database with a default username and password, and set up all the things you need to log in and then start using the app. You can check the migration. Yes, the migration was created. I think the seeding process is yet to be done. Yeah, the seeding has started. Okay, if you have seen, you can safely close this process. So once that happens, you just close it. Now we can actually log into the application. You just choose the web project, use the custom web, and run it. So Okay, we have our web project running. Okay, so our website has launched. Let's try to log in and then verify everything is working. Okay, everything is working. You come and check. If you wanted to create a new tenant, okay, we have the basic dialog working, and we can log out. Perfect. The app is working perfectly fine. Okay, now go to the Solution Explorer. And now we can follow the blog post again. So to extend that entity, we have to first configure the extra properties. Before that, we will create a constant. The constant is the file with the name constant, and this will be created in the domain.shared project. If you come here in the domain.shared project, right click, and then add a class. So you would say constant and click add. This will create okay, we have a constant, and go back, and then we can copy the constant from here and then paste it. So this is the property which we are going to create, and then we just give a constant value for that. Next is updating the custom host module extension configuration that will be available in the shared project as well. You just copy this. And then go to the same domain.host module extension configuration, and here we have a method called configure extra properties. In this method, add. So what are we doing here? We are actually calling the method configure tenant management. This is a method which is provided by the tenant management module for the extension purposes, and we are using the configure tenant method, and we are saying, hey, add this property, which is a string property, and the name of the property is constants.host, which is actually host. Once this is done, the extension module will figure out, okay, there is a new property coming and we have to add it. So this will actually set the properties in the extra properties table, but if you want a custom record in the database, you have to map the efcore to the tenant, and then say, hey, keep this separate in the database table as a column. So for that, we have to add a custom host efcore entity configuration, entity extension mapping that will be available in the efcore project. So copy this, and then we go to the efcore, and then custom host efcore entity extension mapping. This is the file we have to open in the one-time runner. Put the object extension, and here what we are actually saying is that for the tenant, add a new property string with the name host, and the efcore will automatically map the host to property in tenant. Okay, now we have done both of them, and now is the time. Now we have to add migration. So for that, open the terminal for this efcore project and add the migrations. So here I say add migrations. So this will build the application and then add the migration. Okay, the build failed. Let's see why it failed. Okay, interesting. The build actually passed. Okay, now the migrations are done. To see the migrations, all you have to do is go to the efcore project, and then you will see the migrations here. Update tenant with host. So here it says add column. The column name is host, and the table name is ABP tenant. This is perfect. Now what we have to do is update the database. To do that, just copy this command and paste it here. This will build again and then check the migrations and then apply the migrations. Okay, our migrations are applied. The next step is to create a custom repository to retrieve the tenant by the host. We are going to store the host name, and we are going to resolve the tenant by the host name. So first is to create the tenant repository. The first is to create an interface for that tenant repository. So that happens in the domain project. So in the domain project, first let's minimize this. In the domain project, create a new folder called tenant management. In that, we will add a new class and replace that with the interface. And then so the interface inherits from the basic repository, and the basic repository takes the tenant and the GUID as the ID, so that all the other functions of the repository are still available in this custom repository. And we are actually adding only one method here, which will take a host as the input and then gives back tenant. So to implement this repository, we have to implement this in the entity framework core project. So let's copy this. First let's copy the name and then go to the efcore project, create a new folder again called tenant management. And in the tenant management, add a new class, and the class name is custom repository. So in the custom repository is here. Okay, what's happening in this custom repository is we are inheriting from iCustom repository, and we are using a efcore repository, and we are passing the tenant management context. We are not actually passing the current custom tenant DB context. We are passing the tenant management DB context, and we are passing the type tenant and then IDS GUID. In the get tenant by host method, the input is host. We are actually getting the DB context. From the DB context, we are taking the tenant, and then we use this extension method called ef.property and then using the name host, and then we are checking whether the host which is sent is equal to the property host, and if it is true, then we are taking the first record of it. Okay, so we created the repository. Now the next is to add the repository to the DB context. So copy this, and then if you go to the efcore module, you will see options.add default repositories. Just go and add your custom repository and then map it for the property tenant. So for the tenant, we can assign a custom property, a custom tenant repository. Okay, once that is done, now it's time to implement the host tenant resolve. You will do that in the domain project. So in the tenant management folder, add so in the tenant management folder, add new class. The class name is host tenant resolve, and just copy this and paste. So we are actually implementing the tenant resolve contrib and then creating our own contrib, and then we have to override the resolve async method. In this resolve async actually resolves the tenant and then gives back a tenant. We can set the tenant ID in the context here, or if it is empty, that means it's the default tenant. We are getting the HTTP context and also getting the custom tenant repository which we created. We are also taking the host and also passing the host here. And then we will get the tenant and check whether the tenant is not null, and if it is not null, we will set the tenant name. So now we are done with the host tenant resolve. We have to apply this. So to apply this, you have to go to the web project and then apply it in the configure services method. So copy this. In this, go to the custom host web module, and then here in the configure service method. So what we are doing here is we are actually setting ABP tenant resolve options. First, we are actually clearing all the current default tenant resolvers and then adding our custom tenant resolver to the tenant resolvers. Now we just save everything, and the last thing is to update the branding. So when we log in with a new tenant, so that we can see the tenant name instead of the same name called custom host every time, go to the web folder. You will see custom host branding provider. In this, see there is always the app name is going to be custom host. We can change that, and then okay, so what's going on here is we are actually we are doing a DI for the current iCurrent tenant, and then we are setting the app name as the current tenant name if the tenant is available. If the tenant is not available, we are setting it as custom host. So for the default tenant, it will be custom host. For all the other tenants, it will be current tenant name. Okay. Now let's launch the project. Starting. Okay, let's log in. See, the tenant resolver is gone because we are using a custom tenant resolve, and we already resolved a tenant to the default one because there is no custom tenant. And let's log in with main admin password. I don't want to save it. Now let's go and create a new tenant. Now we have a host property. Let's set the host as test1.local because we already created it, and name the test as test1 and test at test.com, and then give the password and then save it. Now let's create another tenant called test2. Use test at test.com and test2.local. So we have two tenants now. Let's log out and stop and relaunch the app just to be safe, because we will cache the tenant information just to refresh everything. So once we relaunch the app, we have custom host. Now change the local host to test1.local. Now we have a test1. Let's change it to test2. See, we are switching from tenant test1 to test2 based on the domain. And now let's try to log in. And now we need to log in with test at test.com. Okay, we are using test.admin, and then we can go and then check the roles and users. We can do the same for test2 and use test at test.com, and we have test2/admin, and then if you go and see the users, and it's test at test.com. So this is the basic implementation. You can add more constraints. Most of the time when you do a SaaS product, you're not going to use always the subdomain. Sometimes you want to have a separate domain for your business or for particular user, for particular tenant. This is the easy way to just use the tenant configuration to resolve. Easy way to resolve the tenant based on the domain instead of always using the subdomain or sending it in a query. That's pretty much it for the video. Just check out the blog post if you have any other issues, and the source code is available in this GitHub repo. I will also put the GitHub repo in the description of this video. Okay guys, see you in the next video. Bye bye.